So let's pause, and then Jay, and you guys just naturally, and then we can talk about what we keep, what we don't keep. I'll talk about all that.
Okay. So now we're recording, but
okay, good. Go for
yeah, I hear you, Jay, in terms of not wanting to be the first one as the white girl speaking on everything. I'm just thinking of more of a time structure. So if someone could volunteer to swap, that would just make it way easier rather than us trying to cycle within that short time frame.
I hear you.
Anyone?
Marty, you down to go first, Marty? I'm down to go first. I just want to preface this by saying my answers might not be as eloquent as I am.
That's
okay.
No,
I'm down to go first, though.
Great.
Okay, so then it goes.
Thank you.
Marty, Jay, is this okay? Then Monica, me, then Ra. Cool? Everyone agree with that? Alrighty, then Ra,
Okay.
I'll let you have it now.
So first of all, I just want to say this whole thing, you all, is an experiment. And I just want to sort of say that out loud. Like, we are trying something different, and it's been inspired by every single one of you in different ways. It started with a conversation with Dana and I, then wound up being a conversation in the car with me and Corey, then wound up being a conversation with Pat. You know, like, it's just like continued to take life and form of its own. And I think the thing that I want to say that kind of even sparked the conversation for me was just, you know, when the incidents of Charlottesville went down, and you all know we've been in a couple of years of just continuing to have these moments where we're just shocked by, you know, and I say a couple of years, but the truth is we know it's been happening for a much longer time, but there's just this way that social media and this world of now everything kind of being under the microscope or under the camera, that we're seeing things that have always gone on, but we have access to them in a very, very different way. And they're affecting people differently because for people who have not been on the front lines of community and have not been struggling or dealing with these issues, this is a new experience. And I think sometimes we can forget that because we may, for those of us who do operate or are on the front lines, you know, we may forget that other people don't have that access. And I really do want to speak it as access. So in any event, when I experienced Charlottesville and I began to have conversations with Dana, we had a lot of really, really deep, powerful conversations that, Dana, are still reverberating with me, like still moving through my heart and my spirit. And then just the conversation that we all had that week before in our archetype about just checking in and just really talking about how do we as a company want to be responding in these times. You know, we're clear it's not business as usual. You know what I mean? So for us, it's not about how many people we're going to get in our funnel this week. You know what I mean? It's really about what's happening in the world and how are our leaders, the entrepreneurs, the incredible people we serve, dealing with that, and how are the people that they're serving dealing and navigating through all of these things. And so because of Dana's proximity to Charlottesville and because of the diversity of this team, I kind of went, my God, we may maybe have a moment to model something different, you know? And I think this idea of kind of being unplugged and unscripted is part of this experiment. Like, as a team, how do we give voice to where we're at around these times? How do we give voice to what we think about as we support our leaders? And then more importantly, what this evolved into was really, how are we starting to give voice to our own journey? So, you know, Dana was like, could we do, you know, matching blog posts, like, you know, what a white girl always wanted to ask a woman of color, or, you know, or what she wants people, you know, people of color to know, or, you know, for me, what I think is, you know, sort of the assumptions. And then it just evolved in the conversation with Pat, and then, you know, all of what's been happening in Pat's world. And, you know, I just got to do this because we're so proud of Pat. Can we just say it? Making history, brother. And I just was like, this team, like what every single one of you bring and who all of you are, you know, I want to cry, and I might say that, I might cry in this moment. You all are so rich in who you be. And I was like, my God, what could be possible if we could come together and just as we are, have a conversation, you know what I mean? And just allow people to experience something different, you know, something maybe that they're not seeing in the world. And so that's really what this is all about. And it's an opportunity even for us, I think, to get to know each other in a different way. And so, you know, this is a moderated conversation. I'm going to ask some questions. Pat, you know, I just really want to honor you and acknowledge you in all of the ways that you're giving life to this and thinking about this in partnership and collaboration with Dana, but really taking the lead on how we're sculpting this conversation. And it is really about the idea of waking up. And I did, you guys know, Facebook Live a couple of weeks ago about this idea of all of the ways that we wake up and where we're awake and where we're asleep, and how waking up can be freaking hard. And sometimes we forget that, you know? And so how do we have compassion for ourselves? How do we have compassion for each other? And so this is our opportunity to start to play with these edges of the conversation. And so, you know, Pat sort of laid out the timing of the structure. He's asking me to ask the questions, so I'm going to do that because he's asking me to ask the questions. And I'm going to say, you know, I may talk some, I may not talk as much, because I really do feel like people hear from me a lot, and it's really an opportunity for people to hear from you all. And so, you know, so I'm just going to sort of delve into it and invite you all to go wherever you feel called to go. So the first question is, and this is great because Pat and I had a little back and forth on the editing of this question, which is also part of it, right? What caused you to become woke? And I put in parentheses, aware. And then, you know, to the concept of widespread oppression / inequality / pain / suffering. You know, did it happen all at once? Was your awakening journey gradual? And just where did you see yourself at the time in the context of systematic inequality or oppression? And, you know, like, what caused those realizations for you? What was your waking up process like? You know, and to what degree do you feel like you're awake or not awake, right? Because that's also part of it. So Madi.
Yes. So my experience was definitely gradual. I grew up in a lower middle class home in Detroit proper. And when I started to realize that my family is not an educated family. So I often didn't have words to put with the inequality that I was seeing. But also knew at a young age, like my father would have conversations with me about experiences in his life when he saw that I wasn't like aware of what was truly happening. And so he would articulate it to his experiences to me in the best way that he could. And so it was great to kind of have that to guide me. What was really eye-opening for me was, and I didn't know this was a thing, of course, before I noticed it, but environmental racism. So growing up in a small neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else, half of the neighborhood was either family members or close family friends. Although, you know, so we felt very safe, but we were surrounded by marathon refineries. The neighborhood I grew up in doesn't even exist anymore. Our house is leveled. And I was in, it really became clear to me when I was in high school, and I was on the debate team, and we went to a debate at a school in the suburbs. And that for me was completely eye-opening. We're like, wait a minute, what's going on here, and why there were beautiful rolling hills and pools and, you know, the BMWs, and didn't see a refinery in sight, didn't see, you know, a liquor store in every corner, didn't see, saw a grocery store in every corner. And so that for me was one of the first times where it really kind of struck me. Because prior to that, had you asked me where I grew up, I would have said a middle-class neighborhood. Based on kind of what my family had versus what others had in the home. And you ask me now, and I say lower middle class, barely above the poverty line, and probably most parts below it. So that is how it started for me, in terms of really being aware of who I am and you know, how I exist in the world, you know, based on the color of my skin, you know. So
thank you. Jay.
Super powerful. Thank you, Madi, for sharing that. And I can relate around the language. You know, I'm from Denver, Colorado. Big up Denver. What? I always claim my hometown. And I was in a neighborhood that was really dope. It's multiracial, primarily middle class, and then on the edges was upper middle class, and then on the other edge was lower class. So it was like, and we were right on the middle, but toward the other side of lower class, middle class. And so all of my schooling experiences was multiracial. And it was when I went to high school, actually, that's when they started doing busing integration. And so all of the kids from this particular neighborhood got bused to the hood. And in the parking lot, because this is Denver, so yes, you know, kids drove their cars to school. There were like BMWs in the parking lot. And then at lunchtime, all the kids in the cafeteria were African American or Latino, and all the white kids drove in their cars to go to restaurants in the neighborhood. So it was this interesting way of seeing, like there was integration, but it was like segregated integration in terms of class and race. And my personality was of a social butterfly, and that's just, you know, who I was. And so I kicked it with like all of the cliques. And the woke moment came when, and it involved adults, is when the cops were targeting my friends who were African American and Latino. And in the targeting of that, the way that they treated me was extremely different. And basically they tried to round up my friends. This is, you know, 15, 16-year-olds, and cart them off to jail. And to me, they gave me a pep talk and like, why are you hanging out with this group? They're from the wrong side of the tracks. And that's the first time that it just hit me really hard. And why is because these were people that I cared about and I was friends with, and we were all doing the same thing, and I was treated 100% differently, and I knew it was not fair and not right, but I didn't have the language, Madi, back to like your language point. Like, it was a lived experience that I couldn't understand or define with language, but obviously it was clearly wrong. And fast forward to college is where I first understood the concept of white supremacy, which was just crazy to me, because it was like, as a white girl growing up, it's like the water that I was swimming in and I didn't even know it. It was the air that I was breathing and I had no context for it. And it's like when the frame hit me, it was like a lens that allowed me to understand my prior 10 years and be like, oh shit, this is what was going on. So that's how it really was. The lived experience plus then the knowledge base allowed me to be woke in a way that allowed me to be in action around being a white person with white skin privilege and what I could do about it. So I'll pause there, but that's how I became woke. And by the way, for me, it never ends in terms of becoming more and more aware. I'm still becoming aware every single day. So
yeah, I'm going to keep it moving, but I do want to say, Jay, I want to put a circle around the term white supremacy, because that language is very charged for people. And I want to come back to it, you know, because I know that you can give the framing on that. So I do want to just put a page mark and say that I'm going to come back to that before we sort of lean into our second round, because I think it's really, really important to talk about what white supremacy is. Actually, I'm going to look at Pat. Pat, can she do this real quick, or should I keep moving?
I say we go from it, and I'll cut a minute off my time.
Okay. I just think it's important. So Jay, define white supremacy as you understand it and why you use that particular language.
Beautiful. Yes, and there are different frames. So the way that I've been taught around white supremacy and the importance of naming it is because it's a system of oppression. It's structural in nature. So it's the way that institutions in the world interact with each other that has white people benefiting and folks of color or marginalized communities not benefiting. Different than individual actions and behaviors, it's structural. And the basis of white supremacy is that white people are superior to people of color. So that's the basis of it. And then the structures are built around that in all of our institutions, educational, religious, the prison industrial complex, you know, you name it, the job market, everything is built to uphold the concept of white superiority.
Okay. I just want to thank you.
And if other people want to add,
I was about to say there may be questions, there may be anything. Does anybody want to add anything to this framing of white supremacy? Just again, because I think it's important in terms of this language and lexicon.
I just want to reference a really powerful book for folks who want to delve into the systemic racism that exists in our world, not just in our country. It's called The Racial Contract by Charles Mills. He's a very well-known and excellent theorist and philosopher, and really lays out the historical events that created our contract around making race exist. And it was very powerful for me to read. It's been very powerful for some of my teaching.
Which, by the way, Monica makes a huge point, which is just this last thing I'm going to say. Everything I just said includes the belief that race exists.
Yeah.
And the challenge with that is that race is a social construct used for, the continuation of power. So even though I use the term white because of our current construct, and I will use the term white because I think I need to identify myself that way, race is a social construct. Racism is real. And I think that's the water we're swimming in, is that the entire thing is built on a lie.
Yeah, and I think I was going to say even just the terminology social construct. And again, Pat, I'm just kind of leaning in a little bit to the lexicon because I think it's important. Social construct means what, Jay?
It's made up. It's literally made up.
We created it as humans.
Yeah.
Somebody created it and everybody bought into it.
There was a societal, there was a societal decision agreement made, to create it. And so this idea of systemic and ideology and what are the ideologies that drive systems is what we're talking about when we come into this conversation.
Yeah, there's no scientific biological base that concludes that there are different races. Yeah. It was a decision that we made.
Human Genome Project, hashtag Human Genome Project, you guys. So you're also going to get a reading list out of this, I think, maybe, as well. Some sites to check out. Monica.
Yeah, my experience has been very interesting because I spent my growing up in different worlds. So part of my growing up was with my grandmother in South Dallas. She was a domestic. She had an third grade education and beautiful penmanship. And she sent my mother to college, and my dad's family was, I think about 7 out of the 9 children went to college. He worked on the railroad. He was the product, our family is the 3rd generation. I am 3rd generation from slavery because my grandfather's mother created him based on a relationship of having been a slave and having 12 children with the man who owned the house, which was a white man in the big house. And she had the little house out back, and all of her beautiful biracial children were not treated equally. So my grandfather was born in 1886. And so this idea that slavery was so far away and we should be over it doesn't resonate with me. And my mother's father was rushed out of town in some little town in Louisiana that he didn't know the name of, to Texas to live with his aunt on the day of his birth in the middle of the night because of fear that he would be killed. Mm-hmm. So some of this is very, it's in our DNA, the experience. And so then we get to be in the world, and so I have that. And then I spent a bunch of my growing up in New Hampshire, where we were one of 2 Black families and the only people of color in the school district, which included about 4 or 5 little towns surrounding the University of New Hampshire. And it was a very different experience. I had freedoms that you would never have in the city. I had, there was no issue. It was like, oh, how come you have a tan all year long? And so there was this kind of schism that happened. The benefit for me personally is I'm a free woman of color. There's a lot of the kind of oppressive indoctrination that I didn't get because I wasn't there. And then went to live in Louisiana with my dad and that side of the family as a teenager, and went from being a little hippie to Black bourgeoisie and had a new culture shock. And I think that's when, I started learning about African American culture and history, and I felt so deprived, like, of the Black church and of all these things that I thought were so important and so amazing. And I think that's when I started to wake up in a new way and starting to put my world in some kind of context. Because my mother was the first on a whole bunch of levels. She was the first college graduate in her family. She was the first person in her, and maybe the only person in her whole family to have a PhD. She was a scientist. She was the first woman, black woman at the University of New Hampshire that was a full faculty, and then chairman of her department, and on and on and on. And she doesn't even own it fully because she just was doing her. And, so then high school, and I'm, it's like I went from hippie to radical in a heartbeat. and decided, when I went to the University of New Orleans, decided like, oh, this is the first time that these Black people are getting a lead role in a play, and it's 1979, 1980, and do I want to wait 4 years? Hell no, I'm going to a Black college, and went to Howard, and and then off to New York after that, and just always was thinking through what is the historical context? What does this mean? How do these systems work? How would you intervene to make some change in this colossal, this huge, complex society that we live in? And I still I have a few answers that feel totally unrealistic. Like after reading the racial contract, I said, oh, I get it. We could dismantle the economic system of the world, and then there'd be no need for us to for people to oppress some people and not other people, until I realized like the poorest person in the most obscure region of the world would never even agree to that because they have some dream of being rich someday. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, back to the drawing board.
I just got chills when you said that.
Wow. Yeah. And so that's where I sit. And as a person who is a woman in her 50s, I sit in a place of how do I support the next generation? How do I help them organize their thinking, assess the situation in good ways to make good movement, and support all their beautiful energy and all of their light and excitement and outrage and anger being channeled in a good way that creates an opportunity for change. So that's kind of my first take on this question.
Thank you so much, you all. And I know we're managing time. I'm mindful of it. And I'm also so blown away by all of what I'm just learning about you all, right? Like we're together every day. And I knew this would be an opportunity to learn so much more about who we are. Pat.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think this is not going to happen in one fell swoop. So we'll do what we can, but I don't want to shortchange the conversations that are coming from this. So thank you all for sharing. And also, Paige Mark, we will be probably part 2 of this. So I'm already thanking you in advance for your time in that. I'll try to keep mine short so we can kind of get it together. I mean, yeah, I was born a Black mixed girl to white women, whose father and his family, who's my Black side, were not a part of my life. And I believe I was kind of colorblind, even though I acknowledged that there was different colors and that I was different. And we went to a Black church, but I never really felt it in my bones that I was not the same as the people were raising me, and they were not raising me to be well equipped with a racist world. And it really wasn't until I went to the South, and I was with my white uncle and his wife, and we were driving down to the Civil Rights Museum, and we're going through these small towns. And my sister was with me at the time, and we were walking around this small town and feeling like people were just staring with disgust, like blatant disgust. And we felt incredibly unsafe. And we asked my uncle, can we go back and wait in the car? And his reaction was, why? And we're like, we don't feel safe. And he's like, you're being ridiculous. And really feeling in that moment, both of us were like, we're not the same as you. And when we went to the Civil Rights Museum and I saw Black people, like we both like bolted. I was like, Black people, I've never been so happy to see Black people, and noticed that his discomfort from being around those people. And then that was really the shifting of my mind, realizing as I was growing up, especially as mixed children, you get fetishized a lot. And people always asking, what is your, well, usually they say a nationality, but they mean is ethnicity. And I would make people guess, and they very rarely would say Black. Like I couldn't be beautiful and a Black girl at the same time. Throw in the other issue I had of gender dysphoria and really never feeling like a girl. So I definitely already had a conscious concept of like, I didn't fit into this barrier, and eventually breaking out of it as a result of actually my involvement in boxing. I really started waking up in that way in terms of knowing like the truths of life are not true at all. It's not so binary. It's not man and woman. There's room for me to grow. And I started becoming more aware around racial inequity and also gender inequity, and understanding that I was something different. But it was after I lost the Olympic trials in 2012, which was a lot of struggle in terms of gender equity. I hurt my shoulder while I was like running through the streets, drunk, crying. And because of that injury, I wasn't able to compete. And a social justice organization asked me to be involved in their training. And that's when we really did the deep dive. And I realized like there's so much more at work, even from my own suffering, and that this system is so widespread, and specifically what is my role in it got explored more and more. So I would say that was really the ultimate turning on awakening, and knowing like it's still a process for me as I'm in community, as I'm pushing my own thinking and challenging my own biases, that this process is always happening.
So just take a deep breath before we move to the second question, and just take each other in. And then I just want to open it up to see if Dana, I'm looking at our time as well. Like I may go, if you want to say anything, just anything that you may want to say just about how you grew up or your experience, and you don't have to. But it's like this would be the moment to get your, to get your voice in as we then start to move to the next question.
I could probably give a brief statement. And bear with me, because for me, this is new territory. So my verbiage may not be as eloquent as my team members. But I would say that at the surface, I was probably more aware than the average bear, but that's not really saying that much. But I think I started taking a deeper dive when I started to, I went into with the intention of better learning the Move the Crowd community. And so I asked Raw for some books, some documentaries, some people I could talk to, and created basically like a summer research project. And truly coming from the branding perspective and that was the original agenda, but it sort of turned into something much greater than that. And, I wouldn't dare say I'm woke, and that's not really a term that I would care to use for myself in general, but aware, I think, is a good word. And I think that the more aware people can be for others, the more united we can be. So that's my quick statement.
Thank you. So process, we're all in different stages of the process. So I want to move to the next question. And Pat, are you okay in the interest of time if I don't do me? Awesome. Okay. I just want to check in. So